All right, thanks for talking with us, Russell. You were in Vancouver for a good chunk of the Olympic outreach, and I was just wanting to find out a bit from you about what was happening, what YWAM was doing there, and how it just tied in with the rest of the body of Christ in Vancouver.
Yeah, for sure, Bill. YWAM did have the opportunity to be participating in the Olympic outreach. And so YWAM Vancouver, quite a few years ago, I think it was 6 years ago, began real involvement and commitment and support to an initiative called More Than Gold, which was different organizations as well as local churches throughout the greater Vancouver area. And More Than Gold had certain objectives to provide radical hospitality to the visitors that came to Vancouver. And so I watched the YWAMers in Vancouver really join that 100% with their hearts. And so they wanted to serve More Than Gold and the body of Christ in Vancouver. They did a great job doing that. One of the things that we were privileged to have as YWAM was an opportunity to participate in the training of all those outreach teams, whether they were YWAM or not. And so it was a wonderful time of seeing the body of Christ come together for the greater good, and also to display a side of the church we don't always see displayed, and that is more of a hospitable, welcoming approach, and less of a on the street, in your face kind of proclamational side of evangelism. Not that that doesn't have its place, I think it certainly does. But it was obvious through the Olympic Organizing Committee they didn't want certain things to happen, like tracts distributed en masse and things like that. They specifically spoke against that. And so there was a real sense of celebration, a real sense of welcoming, and the volunteers that were involved in More Than Gold and the YWAM Olympic Outreach really had a heart to love people, have compassion, and connect with people and have spiritual conversations, absolutely, but to do it in a way that was respectful of the reality of a post-Christian place like Vancouver, which is one of the most unreached areas of North America, and the intensity of focus on sport and not necessarily other aspects of what's going on in life.
Now, one of the outreach that you guys were involved in was to do with human trafficking, the sex trade, called This Is Not a Sport. I understand that they had some like sit-ins, silent protests and stuff. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Buying Sex Is Not a Sport is a grassroots movement of silent witness and solidarity with the women that have been prostituted or exploited. It's not a protest against the women, but it's a protest against the demand that men have to have access to the bodies of women and children. And so YWAM is very supportive of this. Individual YWAMers as well as YWAM Vancouver and the leaders there. And so I was doing it from another city, from Calgary, and joining and supporting YWAM and supporting Buying Sex Is Not a Sport. And yeah, it was a different place, I think, as evangelicals and as YWAMers, that protest side of things. It was quite exciting because you went in knowing who you were, and you had your identity, and you had the role of prayer and hearing God's voice, and yet we wanted to be sensitive to what they felt was best, because they're long-term working with women and helping women to exit the sex trade, and also reaching out to women that are being exploited, which is everybody involved with the sex trade. And so we had that opportunity, and if I can, Bill, I'll share with you a little bit about what that looked like.
Yeah.
When there was known places like a strip bar where there was prostitution going on, or trafficking, where women were trafficked and used and exploited through a strip bar and then also for prostitution, Buying Sex Is Not a Sport targeted that place and stood outside with T-shirts that said Buying Sex Is Not a Sport. And they were silent. They didn't say anything. They didn't do anything. They just stood there. They didn't block the entrance. They didn't obstruct women or men from going in or out. And it was pretty impacting. Tourists and Olympic celebrants couldn't ignore the fact that people were standing outside. And the unique thing about Buying Sex Is Not a Sport, it went right across any kind of Christian or religious lines. So we might have been participating with radical feminists, atheists, anyone that was saying women can't be treated this way. And so it's truly an act of justice and truly an act of saying, no, this is not acceptable, whether you're coming from a Christian perspective or a non-Christian perspective. And it was actually quite intriguing and beautiful to watch.
I heard that you had some interesting reactions from people when they saw everybody standing there in those T-shirts.
Yeah, very interesting reactions. Some people, hooted and hollered and said, awesome, good job, and things like that. And some people were actually showed a lot of animosity and hurled insults and called us all kinds of names and things like that. Sometimes the girls came out and they engaged in conversation. And that was very interesting. And a lot of tourists also came and asked questions and wanted clarity between how we could be saying we support the women, but we don't support the exploitation of women. And that clarified some things for them. So there was some great dialogue, but definitely the reactions were quite, they were quite opposite polar, you could say.
Okay. Well, thanks for